Hey everyone, welcome back. This is Elucid. I'm going to be doing an update for the nation Hinnom for Dominions 5. For those of you who watched the Dominions 4 Let's Play, this should get you up to speed for Dominions 5. I'm actually re-uploading this video. In the previous video, if you happen to watch it, I made a mistake about Fire Shield, and I talked about it a whole lot, so I went back and tried to edit the original video, and yeah, basically I have to redo the whole thing. So here we go. How we're going to do this, I'm going to talk first about the nation, what's changed in it, and fortunately, if you're watching this video, the nation's gotten stronger, so nothing to worry about. And then we're going to go into different pretender designs and how the blesses work and all that. So first, in terms of what's changed, the biggest change is they got buffed. They were perceived as a weak nation in early, and they kind of were. They were overpriced a little bit. So what they buffed were the Avites. So every unit here that's an Avite, like this guy, he's 25 gold instead of 30. This guy, he's 25 gold instead of 30. And this guy is 25 gold instead of 30. So every Avite, like even your researchers, this was 125 back in Dominions 4. And this guy was 175. The only Avite that did not get made cheaper was the Avite Charioteer. So that's really, really good because I really like Avites. If you look at them, they have really good stats. They have really high HP. And HP is one of those things in the game that's really hard. Like, you can't really buff HP easily on your units. And they're size 3, which is nice. You still get 2 per square. So having high HP with 2 per square, these are a very buffable troop. And they're very durable into the late mid-game. They're also, because of their high HP, they're pretty good at expanding because they can take a few hits and then you won't suffer attrition. Whereas with like human troops of similar stats, they would take a few hits and you would have some die. Even though you're taking the same net amount of damage across all your troops, your guys just have higher HP thresholds, so they're not going to die as much. So these guys are good for expanding, and then they take buffs really well in the mid-game. I really like them. And if you think about it, 5 gold cheaper is big, right? So from 30 down to 25, it's a cost reduction of like 1/6, which is about like 17%. So it's a big cost reduction. That's like getting a ton of free scales. If you think if this was a significant portion of your army and they're 1/6 cheaper, like that's huge. One thing though, if you recall, I was on the fence whether to get these guys, the Dawn Guard, or these guys, and now I think you definitely want to get the cheaper ones because Dawn Guard got the 5 gold discount, but as a percentage, it's way less, right? So these guys going from 45 to 40, it's like less than 10%, I think. I don't know. It's significantly less than these guys who went from 30 to 25. So the other thing is your archers are cheaper now too, which makes them more comparable for if you're going to compare them to like people with the short bow. These things are really good, and these guys have really good armor. I may actually try using them in a strat now that they're cheaper. You could certainly have them buffed up with like Iron Warriors or Body Ethereal since you have access to all of that, and they'll just sit still while they get buffed for about just forever, and then they'll run into combat. So that would be a fun thing to try. Yeah, so that's a big deal. Your guys are cheaper. Your researchers are cheaper. The 5 gold, it comes out to about 5%, a little less. But like for your Ami, who are going to be your core researchers, so that's kind of like a free scale. Yeah, so pretty good. Good stuff. The other change that affected is forts. The giant forts used to be a horrible liability. Now it's kind of cool. Like, giant forts are really strong. And you don't have to build the big strong one at the beginning. You can kind of work up to it if you want to. So, whereas I used to have really slow, shitty forts, yeah, it's not as bad now. Finally, this is one of the nations that has access to horror spam. And if you recall, the Horror Union in my Let's Play was probably a little upset because they were not getting many rest breaks. I was using horror a lot, and it's a really strong spell, and it probably deserved to be nerfed. There's a little bit of a problem in how they did it. Send lesser horror. This hasn't changed at all. It's still 2 blood slaves and 3 astral. 2 blood, 3 astral, and 9 blood slaves to cast. And actually, I've got a mod on real quick, but I think, okay, let's turn the mod off. So let me pull up Hinnom again. Okay, so if we pull blood back up, it's blood, Centaur is blood 5? That's what I thought. Okay, blood 5, and it's 2 and 3. This hasn't changed. I think it might have changed when the game first came out. I can't remember, but I remember talking with somebody and thinking it changed. What has changed a lot is horror. This used to be blood 8, and now it went to blood 9, and there's a big research gap between blood 8 and blood 9. It's kind of nice because most of the time people wouldn't really want to go blood 9, but now there's an incentive, a larger incentive to. The problem is the incentive isn't actually that large because in addition to moving it to blood 9, they also changed it from blood 3 to blood 4 and from Astral 4 to Astral 5, so you need 2 additional paths to cast it, and it's way higher, and the blood slave cost increased. It went from 15 to 20. So this was a good spell. It deserved to be nerfed. But I think they nerfed it to hell where you like might cast it a few times in a game. Yeah, it'll be really hard. I mean, there's very few nations that can even get Blood Astral this high semi-reliably with items. So the number of nations that can like actually spam it out now, ooh, it's going to be really small. And then I don't even know if you want to. Like the amount of gear you have to invest to get where you have one guy who can cast it, and then the Blood Slave cost per turn. I mean, you can turn these Blood Slaves into something else. So I think it will still see use, but it's been nerfed a lot. So if you're planning on playing these guys like a horror spam nation, just know that strategy has been very, very much nerfed in terms of the Centaur. Some lesser horrors are still okay, but they tend to kind of, you can't really summon them in big groups because you get a lot of the walking ones which will kill each other. Yeah, and then they can't really kill any armies. So that's Blood Slaves. Let's go talk about the blesses now. When we're picking a pretender, there's a few different kind of archetypes to go after. If you're relying on your human troops, you want to go mostly for scales, and that's going to give you the better long game play. If you're relying on your Melquarts and your Raphael warriors for early expansion, it's going to be tricky because you're going to need some scales to get any number of these guys out because they cost a ton of resources and gold. Especially if you're sending these guys out to lead them. So, yeah, it's a little tricky, but if you're going to rely on these guys, you're going to need a Bless if you want to use them for initial expansion. And then if you get a Bless, you're probably going to want an Awake Bless. Though you could do, I don't know if any of the incarnate blesses are good enough. I mean, the non-incarnate blesses are good enough for you to expand with these guys right out of the gate efficiently. So I think you're basically locked into taking an Awake Pretender if you want to use these guys to expand. And you would get to choose between an Awake, like expanding Pretender, or a Researcher. And you can make a strong case for a Researcher because these guys really need some alteration researched before they come online. And once you have alteration researched, you can kind of skip these guys, the Raphaelite warriors, and just put all of your stuff into Melquarts and then more forts. So those are all things to think about. How are you going to do it? The nice thing that's also changed from 4 to 5 is Imprisoned used to give you 250 points. Now it gives you 350. So there's a bigger buff if you go Imprisoned. So if you go Imprisoned and take scales, you can, and you really rely on your human troops, it will, that strategy has kind of been buffed, in addition to your human troops getting made cheaper. So you can also go on like a Light Bless, where you only use these guys once you have significant spells for them to cast, where they can self-buff, and you rely mostly on human troops. It's probably the strategy I prefer. But you can definitely also do something Awake or Dormant, where these guys come online with a stronger Bless earlier. So we're going to go talk about all the spells. Or not spells, the Blesses. I'm going to try to go through this pretty quickly. For fire, the ones that are kind of noteworthy here are fire resistance. Your guys already have, I believe, 8 fire resistance, 7 or 8, something like that for your Melquarts. And that's really good. It will stop a lot of stuff, like they won't get heat aura and stuff from fire elementals. Some big fire evocations they can still get hit by. And if you're putting up Firestorm, which is a really good late mid-game spell, and you have this on your Melquarts, they would be pretty horrific to try to fight. You know, you've got a bunch of... Now, a lot of your Melquarts, the Earth and the Fire ones, can both self-buff fire, so you could skip it, but not a horrible idea to pick it up if you're going to go for a Firestorm strategy. Then we have Heat Aura, which is something you could get. It wouldn't be super great. But your guys are going to be sitting there in combat for a long time, and you're going to have Heat Dominion, so you could make an argument for Heat Aura. I find the Aura is kind of not impressive. If they were made non-incarnate, I would probably buy them sometimes. And the other thing with auras is usually you want a lot of units with an aura, and we're only going to have a few. So I don't know, I would not recommend the aura. Fire Shield, this is what got me into a lot of trouble in the last video. I had a friend tell me that they stacked, a friend who plays this game at least as much as I do, and that you could put Fire Shield and Charcoal Shield, and somebody cast Fire Shield, so you have to bless the spell and the item, and they would all stack and you would get a huge amount of fire armor piercing. Turns out it doesn't work that way. Chris Nighthawk was, I hope I said it right, was nice enough to point that out for me, so I'm having to re-upload all this. Thanks, man. Flaming weapons you want to skip. Okay, one more note on Fire Shield. Not a bad idea. You could still get it. One of the things that counters your Melquarts is Skelly Spam, and you can kind of counter that by a couple things. You can put on Boots of Behemoth. Fire Shield is also pretty good. Yeah, it's a pretty good spell. And it's not that expensive. So if you have some other reason you want to get fire, you could get Fire Shield. Like, yeah. If you were going to rush Eternal Pyre or something like that, you could totally pick up Fire Shield along the way and then use your Pretender to cast Eternal Pyre, and you would be in good shape. Next, we have Flaming Weapons. Not very good because we have very few units. They already hit really hard. Flaming Weapons you generally want on mini units that don't hit all that hard already. Awe would be really good. It's something you can't cast as a spell, so this is kind of the only way to get Awe on your Sacreds without getting really lucky and getting like the heroic trait. So you definitely want to think about getting Awe. It's really strong, especially if you go an Awake build. You can use these guys to expand, and you can also have this come online dormant, and having Awe when you start using these guys and they start self-buffing, they'll be really, really hard to counter. For air, the shock resistances take a particular note, because either via having like an Earth Melquart or having Earth Amis, you can cast Iron Skin, or you can do Iron Warriors and get effectively the Iron Skin buff on your Melquarts, which is going to make them disgustingly hard to kill. The problem with it is you get a shock weakness, and then depending who you're fighting, there's a fair amount of air powers in the early age, and if they're dropping lightning bolts, those are one of the counters to super combatants anyway. So having a way to get shock resistance, both to counteract the malice from Iron Skin, and then also so that you're not vulnerable to a lot of the anti-super combatant stuff, is really, really good. So if you get it, you can get one or the other, or you can pick up both. I'd probably pick up both. Everything else here you can kind of forget about. For water, you could get a cold resistance. The reason you'd really want to get water is it's one of the few paths that Hinnom does not have, right? So if you get water on your Pretender, it's really just to cover like a path gap. Most of the stuff here, I would probably get the resistances, maybe a Swamp Survival. The defense, you're relying on protection, not defense, to stay alive. The Chill Aura you wouldn't want to get because you have a Heat Dominion. Quickness you don't want to get because you already have fatigue issues. So yeah, you can skip most of it. You want to look at the resistances, potentially Swamp Survival. That's about it. You could do Water Walking if you want to cross rivers. I don't really think that's worth it. But you do have Heat Dominion, so it does make Water Walking more valuable, since rivers will not be frozen over, ever. Um, okay, Earth. Mountain survival would be useful. It's always nice on your super combatants. Reinvigoration. This is something you definitely want to look at. If there's a way for you to get reinvigoration, you want it. You're going to have to be itemizing, like putting items on your dudes to give them reinvigoration. And essentially, every time you cast reinvigoration via your bless, you're reducing the gem load you're going to put on the items you have to put on your dudes. And you never know what kind of gems you're going to find. It could be really hard to get reinvigoration items. This is really good. Your guys are going to need reinvigoration. One way or another, or you can't really use them as super combatants. Reconstruction, don't need it. Strength of the Earth, you don't need. Unbreakable, on first glance, it looks interesting. You would get affliction resistance, and you have super combatants who tend to get afflictions, and you don't want them to have them. The thing is, you have blood super combatants, so they can remove all of their afflictions with Blood Feast. So I think you actually skip it, even though it would be kind of cool. Fire and shock resistance. For just 5 Earth Gems, you get fire and shock resistance 10. So it's pretty good. It's like major fire, major shock. This can kind of do 2 birds with 1 stone. The only real problem is, I think you're probably going to want, if you get Earth, you're really going to want reinvigoration, like as much of that as you can get. And it's really hard to get both, because then you're going to have to put a lot of paths into Earth, and that's going to be expensive. So you have to pick. I think this is totally a legit pickup. You could pick it up for your build. The only problem with it is it's incarnate only, whereas the other resistances are not. So if you pick this, you won't have it till later, unless you have an awake. And this isn't really the kind of thing you generally want to put on an awake dude, because you're not really getting attacked by fire and shock in the first year, and often even in the second year. So, you know, the other thing with fire resistance is it makes you totally immune to fire elementals, which people can use to counter your Melkorts. They don't do it well, but they do it a little bit, a teeny bit. Okay, larger. You could get this. It makes you immune to trample. It does. It says in the description, I haven't tested this, it does work on size 5 units, which would mean they go up to size 6, which would make them kind of horrifyingly big. It would also give them a lot of extra HP and a little bit more map move. So this would be kind of cool. I like the idea of it. Again, it competes with like reinvigoration, but you could do it. I think it would be really funny, because your giants are size 5, so this gives them that bump up to size 6. Hard skin you could do. It would increase your protection on your dudes. This would be something you could do, especially if you want to do an awake build. Once you get in the mid game, though, it's going to be a little bit redundant, because you're going to be casting Iron Skin and stuff anyway. I forget, this may... somebody can write in the comments. I don't know how this stacks with Iron Skin. I don't know if you get the full +5. Either way, it's diminishing returns, because this will increase your natural armor, and then that will have diminishing returns with your actual physical armor, which your Melkorts come with. So I'm not super excited about Hard Skin. I think it's probably better to spend 1 more point and get Fortitude, which will cut the damage you have coming in half. This applies after the armor check, though. So it's not like you cut the damage in half and then your armor blocks it all. What else? Astral, depending who you're fighting, you could get magic... No, I think you have Dawn Blades. I don't think you need magic weapons. Okay, we're going to check that, guys. No more mistakes, so I have to re-upload this shit. Yeah, you have a Dawn Blade, so it's magic. You don't need magic weapons. Solar weapons, nope. Probably wouldn't get it. And magic resistance would always be good. Magic resistance is really good on super combatants, so if you wanted to get Astral, you could totally pick this up. And I think that's about it. If you're fighting somebody where you know Gift of Heaven is going to come out, Luck is actually okay versus Gift of Heaven. Because if you get hit by it, you'll have a 75% chance of surviving. But I don't think you would ever build that into a Bless. You would more use your Astral Amis for it. Anyway, worth pointing out. And then for Death, there's nothing really here you want. Fear is kind of interesting, but not really. You can kind of skip all of Death. Like things like, oh, you could get Stygian Flesh and it would be good on an Awake expansion. Yeah, it would, but then in mid-game it gets totally overwritten by like Iron Skin and stuff like that. Nature, you've got the poison resistance you could pick up if you were going Nature. Nature's nice because you can, if you have it like on a dormant chassis, you can get Mother Rokop potentially first, which is what I did in my Let's Play, and it gives you cool things like Vine Shields for the rest of the game, which make your guys even harder to kill. So there's an incentive to get Nature on a Dormant Pretender or an Awake Pretender. If you go for an Imprisoned Pretender, it's like, eh. Recuperation sounds cool on Super Combatants, but again, we have Blood Feast because our Super Combatants are Blood Super Combatants, so we don't need it. Berserker, I actually lost a lot of battles due to these guys routing. They'll wade into combat, and then somebody will throw a terror or something at them, and eventually they rout. It's really annoying, and then they can die much more easily when they rout because their defense goes to shit. So you can fix this with a Flesh Eater. I think that's probably the more economical way to do it. But this is an option. Like, you could go Berserker. Yeah. It's going to make your fatigue issues a little worse, but it is an option. Bark Skin, we'd skip for the aforementioned reasons. We skip all the other shitty protection buffs. Regeneration, this is the shit. You would definitely want it if you could get it. It's expensive, so if you get it, you can have it come online at year 1, and you can use it to expand, or you can just have it come online at the end of... You can have it come online at the very beginning and use it to expand, or you can have it come online like dormant, end of year 1, and then your guys are just going to be horrifying to fight once they start going into combat with all their spells. I think this stacks with, if it works like Dominions 4, it should stack with the cast regeneration buff, which means your guys would be regenerating a huge amount of hit points. Finally, we get the Blood. Blood Surge is really good on Super Combatants. It's basically another way to get defense and reinvigoration. So it's, in some ways, it's kind of expensive reinvigoration, but the +3 attack doesn't hurt either, and the +3 strength, you will kill stuff a little bit faster. So, and the defense is nice. So this is an option. Blood Bond is kind of cool if you have your guys all together and they're all sharing damage. This would be pretty hilarious. Like, imagine 5 Melquirts all blood bonded. Though in reality, if you were to do Blood Bond, you would also be wanting to get the Raphite Warriors. That's kind of what you would use them for, like a Blood Bond and regeneration. I don't think I actually have a Pretender built around that, but I thought about doing it for this next part where I actually show you Pretenders I built. Because that's totally... This would be a really fun Awake build. Blood Bond and regeneration. If ever there were a nation made to do it, it would be Hinnom. Because they have really nasty giants with really good everything else, and the Blood Bond and regeneration will make them very hard to kill. Unholy Weapons, you already hit really hard. You probably don't need it. Blood Vengeance would be cool. You are kind of countered by mages, but it's really expensive. It's too expensive. You used to get a lot of strength with basically the same cost, and now you don't. So, I don't know. You could get it, I wouldn't. So that's it. Now, I've kind of shown you all the different blesses. I'm going to go ahead and flash up a few Pretenders I've made, and we'll talk about them. So here we go. Freaky Deaky, we're going to come back to him. He's the one I would, and if you saw my first video, he hasn't changed. He's probably still the one I would do. You might change different parts about him. First, I'm going to show you some Awake expanders. First, we're going to do a remake of Biblical Beastie. And this is an Awake Pretender. He has Fortitude, which is going to give him half damage and regeneration. He's going to have shitty scales. We're going to trash Turmoil more than we trash Productivity. And we're going to have Growth, and then we're going to have Drain. We don't really want to crash Luck because we have the best heroes in the game, and you'll still get heroes. You'll just get them a little slower if you don't take Luck. But if you go Misfortune, you're really never going to get your heroes. So you don't really want to sacrifice this anymore. And especially when you're going Turmoil. Turmoil, Misfortune is a scary thing. But generally you have scales. Like, that's the summary. And so Fortitude, Regeneration, you're going to be able to expand with your Raphite Warriors. And then when your Melquirts come online, they will be horrifying. Anyway, this is like an Awake build. The challenge with this one is you probably do really well in year 1. You probably do pretty well in year 1. You do really well in year 2. Year 3 and 4, you're going to start struggling because you don't have as much income. To have equivalent income to somebody else, you're going to have to have expanded to get really big, and then you're going to look really scary because you're Hinnom too, and people are going to probably try to attack you. But it's fun, especially in a blitz game. You could do something like this where the long term doesn't matter quite as much. And you could win a game with this for sure. But it's a little trickier, right? Your long game, which normally looks good as Hinnom as a blood power, it really isn't quite as good. But, that said, blood nations typically can soak up worse scales better than other nations because they can turn population into economy, right, by blood slaves, without really going through gold. So this could work if you do like a really heavy focus on blood. The only problem is Hinnom's not super duper awesome at collecting a huge blood economy because most of their good blood hunters also kill population. So anyway, you could do it. This would be one build. The next Awake Expander we have is Big Meanie. And he's a Scorpion King. He's got awe and then fire and shock resistance. So you could use this. You could also build this guy dormant and have better scales. Like the fire and shock resistance isn't going to help you expand. This is more like a tribute to mid-game, late mid-game. The awe will help you expand. So you probably still could use Raphite Warriors to expand. You'll need more of them in an expansion party than you had above with the Biblical Beastie. But yeah, these can still expand. But and I haven't fully tested all this, but with this guy, I imagine you could expand with like 4 or 5, like with 5 Raphite Warriors, they could chew through hard indies. And probably even less, probably like 3 Raphite Warriors could chew through a lot. With, you do have to worry about your commander getting sniped. With this guy, you're going to need more. I think 5 is probably like the minimum army. Because they will get hit. The all will block a lot, but anyway. You could do this. You could also do this with Fire Shield. Yeah. And the fire and shock resistance is pretty damn nice. It opens up really cool late game stuff like Firestorm, and then you can obviously self-buff with Iron Skin and stuff like that. And this guy's really good at expanding. He can totally expand on his own. He's got really high protection. Next, I'm going to show you a Pretender book nerd who is a Awake researcher. And I think Awake researchers, generally, most people don't really like them. The thing that's really nice about it, especially with super combatant nations, is they can sit in the lab, and he has 43 research. Your early game research is gonna be freaking awesome. So he can sit in the lab, and he can get you to that point where your Melquarts are self-buffing way, way faster, like almost a year faster. At Alteration 3, you get Iron Skin, right? He's gonna get you there in a heartbeat. So, almost as fast as you can make Melquarts. So I think this is actually pretty damn viable. You've kind of trashed your scales a little bit more. But you could jostle these around. But you get Awe, which you're going to have from the start, so you could potentially use Raphite Warriors. I haven't tested. With scales this bad, you're not going to be able to make many humans. So you probably want to use Raphite Warriors with Awe, and they'll be good with Reinvigoration and Blood Surge. But really, you want to switch to Melquarts and kind of forget about the Raphite Warriors. And that's the reason to do an Awake Researcher, is once you get over a little research hump, your gold is much better spent in the Melquarts than it is in the Raphite Warriors. So maybe like your first expansion party would be Raphite Warriors, and then after that you switch to Melquarts who can self-buff, and they will be pretty damn horrifying. Yeah, so I think you could, if we think about it, you could probably win with something like this. The other nice thing is you got the Air-Earth crosspath to get the Elemental Staff that's going to give you a +1 Elemental Magic boost. And yeah, it's basically just good paths too. Next we have Thorax. This is a Dormant Pretender, and you could basically, if you did this, you're going to have kind of better scales. In this case I took luck, but you could also take productivity and shift luck down. Like, you don't really need luck 3, but it is nice with turmoil. But this will give you, this guy in and of himself as a chassis is really good. He's got good base protection. So when he comes online at the end of the first year, you give him some armor, you give him some reinvigoration items, and he becomes pretty horrifying. He's a really strong super combatant. He's got fear, he's got the heat aura, And then later he can jump. He's a combat caster, so he can jump in and cast things like Flame Eruption and stuff. So he'll be a lot of fun to have. It's a kind of cool, really thematic god too. And yeah, when he comes, basically your strategy with this is you're going to have pretty weak expansion. The dormant blesses are going to be probably your weakest expansion because you're not able to rely on human troops and you're not able to rely on your sacreds. But when your Milkworts do come out at the end of the first year, if you have okay research, you're going to get the Incarnate Bless. They're going to be able to kind of catch up on all your expansion. The only difference is that expansion will probably be into your neighbors. So as long as you're cool with being kind of small year 1 and you're okay getting into a war year 2, because you will need to get in a war year 2 to get bigger, a lot of nations are going to really, really struggle with having this guy run around and raid them or defend, because you want him as much as you can in your own dominion, and then having your Melkorts run around with Awe and Blood Surge. But yeah, so any of the Awake builds you can switch to Dormant. But if you're relying on an Incarnate Bless, you really want that out at least the end of after the first year. And then we have Huzzah. Huzzah is a Fire Shield regeneration, and he is Dormant also. You could also take him Awake, though your scales would be worse. But this will again, this is just a different way to play, and your Melkorts will be really hard to kill, like really hard to kill. Fire Shield is going to really help if you're fighting Skeleспam heavy nations like Sarmatia or Zabalba. And regeneration will also help with that, because Skeleспam is usually kind of a thing of attrition, and with Fire Shield you can get through the skeletons normally fast enough, and with regeneration they won't wear through you. But yeah, this is viable. You could go Awake. If you go Dormant, you can see you're basically probably going to be relying on humans, so you're going to have the same thing with the other Dormant Pretender. You're going to have really bad expansion year 1, so you basically have to get in a war as soon as your god comes out. In terms of strength, this Bless is most likely significantly stronger than this Bless when it comes online, but they're kind of different, so you'd have to think more about which one you would particularly want. This is a better commander, though, by a good bit. And finally, we have Freaky Deaky. He's the guy I would pick. And he's, I think, so far the only imprisoned pretender I've shown you. You could do all sorts of different rainbow imprisoned pretenders. This is the one I kind of picked. If you play this way with an imprisoned pretender, you're going to be relying on your human troops for early expansion. And your Melkorts, you'll start recruiting them probably the end of the first year, but you won't really start using them until you get some key research objectives. Because you're not relying on the Bless. The Bless is going to fill in gaps that they have in super combatants that's really efficient to fill in via a Bless. And in that case, it's going to be resistances, especially shock resistance. So you could also think about throwing in some, some other resistances like fire and cold. But anyway, I think this is kind of, and it would depend who you're fighting against, right? Like if you're fighting against Abyssia, you might think about throwing in a fire resistance, because there's going to be fire elemental spam and then all sorts of big fire evocations. Yeah, so it depends, but you've got pretty damn good scales. You've got some order, you've got some productivity. Now I have to test which one's exactly better, whether it's going better to go 1-2 or whether it's better to go 0-3. But anyway, you would want something kind of like this. You have your heat, you have growth, you have luck, so you're going to be getting your national heroes early. Probably better to go 0-3, especially if you're going luck. There's like an anti-synergy between order luck. And then Magic 1 is kind of nice to help your research get going. But basically, this is going to be a focus on the humans, which I think are a good investment. And when your god comes online, you're going to have some nice paths. The Death Blood helps you. The Death is really so that you can cast twice more on yourself, because this is a shitty chassis. And it also will open up getting into vampires. You can do it from 2-4. It's tricky. You have to get a Skull Staff. And then with the Skull Staff, you get a Mound Fiend. And with the Mound Fiend and the Skull Staff, you get a Lich. And with the Lich and a Skull Staff, you get the headpiece, right? I forget what it's called. The skull head thing that gives you +1 death. And then you put the Skull Staff and the head thing on this guy, and then you get death 4. The other alternative, and it's probably less death gems, is you just empower this guy twice. So anyway, when you do that, you get access to Vampire Lords, which is kind of nice. It's a nice thing to have in your pocket. But really, you get the Death for Twiceborn. Air Earth, there's a nice synergy there. You can forge some items, and then you get the staff of the Elemental Staff, which is going to give you +1 in all of your Elemental Pass, which is really nice. And then Blood 4, it's nice to have in combination with Earth and Air. Though you really already have the Blood Earth combination, you don't really have the Blood Air. So this is nice if you... I'm trying to think. I can't really think of any particular good Blood Air things. I mean, you can get Storm Demons, but normally that's not the kind of thing you would do on your Pretender. But once you get to Blood 9, you can get Storm Demons more efficiently, so it might be something you would do. Anyway, that is about it. If I play, next time I'll probably play this. I don't know if this would be the most fun. There's probably other fun... like, this guy is really cool thematically. I would probably like to play with him. You'd have a really kind of troubled early game and you could get squished, but it would be fun to have a nice rebound in the mid game. I don't know if I would do something like this. The other way, I'll just point out, you could build Biblical Beastie. You could cut Fortitude and then just take 2 Reinvigoration, and it'll be a good bit cheaper. You'll have probably a couple more scales. I think the scales hits are pretty tough. Like, I don't know if I would really want to do an Awake Expander. If I did a Blitz, I probably would. But yeah, I think there's a bunch of different ways to play the Nation now. Playing humans is far more viable, which I like, and so that's probably the way I would go. But I hope you guys enjoyed. If you play in a multiplayer game, come write in the comments how it goes. If you get knocked out, put a note, and if you win, especially if you use some thoughts from this video, come back and let me know what you did and how it played out. Thanks, guys. Hope you enjoyed.